Welcome to the Trackpads Military History Podcast, where we bring the terrain, the tactics, and the stories of soldiers to life. Each episode goes deeper than the written article, giving you a front-row seat to the battles that shaped history. Discover more at trackpads.com.
In September 1943, during the invasion of Italy, the fight for survival came down to one place, the Chiunzi Pass, a twisting mountain road above the Amalfi coast that became the literal gate to Naples. The Allies had landed at Salerno under Operation Avalanche, but their beachhead was shallow and precarious. German counterattacks threatened to overwhelm the landings before they could solidify. Whoever controlled Chiunzi controlled the path inland, and with it the fate of the entire campaign. Into this crisis marched Darby's Rangers, a small but battle-hardened force already proven in North Africa and Sicily. Their orders were stark: move quickly, seize the pass, and deny it to the enemy at all costs. It was a mission that sounded simple but demanded extraordinary effort-light infantry, holding against larger, heavier German forces, with little more than speed, skill, and determination on their side. For the Rangers, this fight would be unlike the raids and stealth missions that had built their reputation. At Chiunzi, they would not strike and slip away. Instead, they would dig in and resist wave after wave of German assaults. Artillery, mortars, and probing attacks would hammer them without relief. It would be a defense fought in mud, stone, and scrub brush, where every natural feature became part of their fortress. What makes the defense of Chiunzi Pass so striking is its scale compared to its impact. A few hundred men stood guard over a twisting road. Yet the outcome of Operation Avalanche and the survival of the Allied foothold in Italy depended on their endurance. In the great sweep of World War II, battles like Normandy and Stalingrad overshadow such fights. But Chiunzi reminds us that small unit stands could alter the course of entire campaigns. This story is about how the Rangers held that gate, how they climbed the mountains first, how they shaped the terrain into a defense, how they endured against a determined enemy, and ultimately how their grit at Chiunzi gave the Allies the breathing room they needed at Salerno. Operation Avalanche, the Allied landings at Salerno, set the stage for why Chiunzi Pass mattered so much. The invasion was designed to leapfrog from Sicily onto the Italian mainland, cut off German forces retreating north, and secure Naples as a logistical hub. Naples, with its large harbor, was the only port capable of sustaining the vast tonnage of supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements the Allies required to continue the campaign. Without Naples, the invasion would stall, and between the beachhead and Naples lay the rugged ridges of the Sorrento Peninsula, where Chiunzi Pass stood like a keyhole through which the entire operation had to pass. The landing itself was far from smooth. German defenses, alert and prepared, contested the beaches with artillery, mortars, and counterattacks that threatened to collapse the fragile lodgment. The Allied plan relied heavily on momentum moving fast enough to get off the beaches before the Germans could concentrate. But Salerno's geography limited that momentum. The surrounding mountains offered natural defensive lines for the Germans and left the Allies exposed to enfilade fire and sudden counterthrusts. It was a perilous beginning, and commanders knew that failure to secure the inland approaches would spell disaster. Naples became the central prize of the campaign because it offered more than just a port. Its rail network, road connections, and industrial facilities made it indispensable for sustaining long-term operations. If the Germans managed to hold or cut the approaches to Naples, the Allies would face the near-impossible task of supplying a growing force through the inadequate beachheads at Salerno. Every hour counted, and the pass at Chiunzi represented the most direct corridor toward the city. It was here, on narrow roads winding through cliffs and ravines, that the fate of Avalanche would hinge. The geography of southern Italy added to the urgency. The Sorrento Peninsula jutted out like a natural barrier, its steep terrain channeling movement along predictable paths. Chiunzi Pass controlled one of those arteries. Whoever held the high ground there could dominate traffic, observation, and fire across the approaches. It was not simply a roadblock. It was a natural fortress, where even a small force could stall a much larger one. For the Allies, controlling it meant securing their lifeline to Naples. For the Germans, it was the perfect place to mount a counterstroke. Complicating matters further was the boundary line between Allied formations. British 10th Corps held the northern sector of the beachhead while U.S. 6th Corps held the southern. The seam between them ran directly through the terrain leading toward Chiunzi. Gaps at core boundaries are notoriously dangerous, offering opportunities for an enemy to exploit disunity of command. The Germans understood this, and their doctrine emphasized striking hard at seams to split opponents apart. If Chiunzi fell, not only would Naples be threatened, but the entire Allied front could be torn in two. Field Marshal Kesselring, in charge of German defenses in Italy, recognized the opportunity. He ordered counterattacks to be launched wherever Allied cohesion appeared weakest. German mobile reserves, experienced in mountain warfare, were directed toward the ridges above Salerno, with Chiunzi high on their list of objectives. The Rangers would not just be facing chance patrols or light opposition. They would be confronting seasoned troops trained to exploit terrain and break through seams in an enemy line. For Darby's Rangers, the mission could not have been clearer. Their task was to seize Chiunzi Pass before the Germans could consolidate, fortify it, and hold against whatever came. In the broader Allied plan, they were not merely one of many units, but the linchpin at the hinge of two corps. Success at Chiunzi meant holding open the gate to Naples and stabilizing Avalanche. Failure would have handed the Germans exactly what they wanted, the chance to cut the beachhead in two and drown the invasion in its infancy. The movement of Darby's Rangers toward Chiunzi Pass was as critical as the defense itself. The order was straightforward: get there first. Every hour of delay risked allowing German forces to seize the ridgeline, and once they had it, no amount of Allied firepower would easily dislodge them. The Rangers understood this urgency and set out quickly, burdened with weapons, ammunition, and supplies they would need to fight in isolation. The night approach up the mountain was grueling. The men picked their way along goat tracks and mule paths that clung to steep cliffs, often climbing in silence with only the crunch of boots on stone to mark their progress. Each soldier carried not only his personal weapon but also extra loads of mortar rounds, machine gun belts, and rations. The terrain allowed for no vehicles, no shortcuts, and no easy resupply. Everything they needed had to be hauled by hand, step after exhausting step. Despite the weight and the climb, silence was enforced with discipline. Rangers tied down metal parts, padded canteens, and learned to step in rhythm to muffle noise. Any clatter might betray their movement, and they knew German patrols were already probing nearby ridges. The night march became a test of patience and nerve, with men sweating under heavy loads yet determined to reach the pass unseen. In these moments, the Rangers, training in stealth and endurance, came to the forefront. By dawn, Darby's force had begun to spread across the ridgeline. Patrols fanned out to locate defensible terrain, rocky outcroppings that could serve as machine gun nests, knolls with clear fields of fire, and road bends that offered natural choke points. These positions were quickly reinforced with stone walls, shallow scrapes, and camouflage netting. The goal was to turn every curve of the mountain road into an obstacle. Even with limited manpower, the Rangers made the landscape appear alive with defenders. Communications were improvised under these austere conditions. Radios, never reliable in mountain terrain, often failed to reach beyond the next ridge. To compensate, Darby's men established a system of runners carrying messages by hand, relaying orders between scattered squads. Whistles, hand signals, and even the placement of stones were used to convey meaning silently. It was primitive but effective, allowing units to coordinate even without constant electronic contact. Darby himself moved with his men during this phase, checking positions, encouraging squads, and ensuring the line was cohesive. His leadership was visible and personal, reminding soldiers that their commander shared their hardships. Company and platoon leaders mirrored this approach, making decisions quickly as the terrain dictated. The Rangers knew they were stretched thin, but, with every outpost manned and every approach covered, they began to feel a measure of control over their new fortress. By the time German patrols began to appear in the distance, the Rangers were ready. What had been only a twisting mountain road hours earlier was now a fortified defense, bristling with hidden firepower and carefully chosen strongpoints. The pass had not only been seized but transformed. The enemy would not find it undefended. They would find a gate that had been closed against them, manned by soldiers prepared to hold it to the last. The first German probes against Chiunzi Pass began almost as soon as the Rangers settled into their positions. Small patrols crept forward along the narrow road and through the brush, testing for weaknesses in the defense. These were not full assaults, but sharp, probing contacts designed to measure the strength of the force holding the heights. The Rangers answered with controlled bursts of fire, careful not to reveal all of their positions. To the Germans, the defenders appeared numerous and well entrenched, when in reality only a few hundred men were spread across the ridgeline. The illusion of numbers was one of the Rangers' greatest assets. Machine guns fired from one position and then quickly shifted, mortars dropped rounds from concealed tubes and then went silent, and rifles cracked from multiple angles. To an attacker, it seemed as if entire companies occupied the pass. This deception discouraged rash advances and forced the Germans to reconsider their approach. Every sound, every muzzle flash suggested a larger force than actually existed. Artillery soon followed these probes. As German commanders attempted to pound the ridge into submission, shells crashed into rocky outcroppings, sending jagged fragments whistling through the air. Mortars whumped steadily, blanketing suspected strongpoints with explosions. For the Rangers in their shallow scrapes, survival meant hugging the earth and enduring the concussions that rattled the bones. There was no real safety. Even stones piled as protection shattered under near misses. Yet the men endured, refusing to abandon their vantage points. The pattern of battle began to take shape. Each barrage was followed by infantry feelers, squads attempting to exploit whatever weakness might have been created. But time after time, the Rangers pushed them back with well-aimed fire. Machine guns cut down attackers caught in the open, while riflemen targeted officers and NCOs directing movements. Mortars bracketed advancing groups, breaking up formations before they could gain momentum. The Germans discovered that every attempt at probing the pass led to losses. The terrain itself compounded their difficulties. The narrow road forced attackers into single-file columns, easy prey for ambush fire. Even attempts to infiltrate along goat paths ended poorly, as Ranger patrols anticipated such moves and intercepted them in sudden, violent skirmishes. German soldiers found themselves climbing steep inclines only to walk into well-prepared ambushes, where grenades and close-range fire made quick work of their efforts. The mountains, so often an ally to German tactics, here favored the defenders. Despite the ferocity of the shelling and the persistence of the probes, morale among the Rangers held firm. The men rotated through foxholes, shared rations, and steadied one another during lulls. Veterans of earlier campaigns reassured newcomers, reminding them that endurance was the key. Every failed German push became a small victory, reinforcing the belief that the pass could be held. The enemy was determined, but so were they. By the close of these first engagements, it was clear that Chiunzi would not fall to a quick thrust. The Rangers had met the opening blows with resilience, deception, and disciplined fire. The Germans had been forced to reckon with the reality that this mountain gate was defended by troops who refused to yield. What began as probes had confirmed the difficulty of the task ahead, setting the stage for larger and more desperate assaults still to come. When the probing failed, the Germans escalated to full-scale attacks against Chiunzi Pass. What began as small skirmishes turned into coordinated assaults supported by artillery and armor. The Rangers, spread thin along the ridgeline, braced themselves as columns of infantry pressed forward under the cover of pounding barrages. This was the test they had prepared for, holding against the weight of the enemy in terrain that gave them only a narrow margin for survival. The terrain quickly proved decisive. German tanks and half-tracks struggled on the twisting road, forced to crawl in single file along hairpin turns that clung to steep cliffs. A single well-placed mine, a disabled vehicle, or even a machine gun burst could stop the column cold. From their vantage points above, Rangers poured fire into the choke points, breaking up formations before they could gain momentum. The road that might have delivered German armor instead became a funnel of destruction. Infantry assaults were no easier. Advancing uphill against entrenched defenders, German soldiers found themselves exposed at key bends where every move was anticipated. The Rangers had mapped out kill zones in advance, and when attackers entered them, machine guns, rifles, and mortars converged with devastating effect. Grenades rolled downhill, bouncing into clusters of men. A handful of Rangers with coordinated firepower could halt dozens of attackers, forcing them to retreat in disarray. Frustrated, German commanders tried to bypass the main road altogether. Patrols and larger detachments attempted to scale goat tracks and lesser-known trails, hoping to outflank the defenders. But these moves played directly into the Rangers' strengths. Small teams of Americans, trained in stealth and mountain fighting, lay in wait on the slopes. Ambushes erupted suddenly, with bursts of automatic fire and grenades cutting down attackers before they could find a foothold. The flanking maneuvers that might have cracked a conventional defense instead became costly failures. What gave the Rangers a decisive edge in this phase was the integration of supporting fire. Spotters hidden in observation posts relayed enemy movements to Allied artillery batteries positioned behind the beachhead. Within minutes, shells rained onto German concentrations, breaking up their staging areas. Naval gunfire from warships offshore added even greater weight, lobbing heavy rounds into valleys and road junctions. The combination of light infantry on the ridges and overwhelming firepower in depth created a layered defense the Germans could not match. Even so, the strain on the defenders was immense. Each barrage left foxholes shattered. Each assault added to the casualty list. Supplies of ammunition and water ran low, carried up by hand along treacherous trails under enemy observation. Wounded men were dragged down the same paths. Often under fire, their evacuation as perilous as the battle itself. The physical and psychological toll was heavy, yet the Rangers endured. Survival meant adapting, improvising, and refusing to yield ground no matter the cost. Ingenuity became as important as firepower. When ammunition ran short, Rangers scavenged from the battlefield, using captured German weapons to supplement their own. Roadblocks of stone and wreckage were thrown up to slow armored vehicles. Machine guns were shifted between positions to create the impression of larger forces. Every resource was stretched, every tactic exploited, as the Rangers fought not only the enemy but also exhaustion, thirst, and dwindling supplies. By the end of these full-scale assaults, the Germans had failed to break the line. The pass remained in Allied hands, though at terrible strain to the men holding it. For the attackers, every push forward brought heavier losses. For the defenders, every successful stand reinforced the belief that they could hold indefinitely. The battle for Chiunzi had entered a new phase, no longer just a test of arms, but a grinding contest of willpower between a determined attacker and a force of light infantry refusing to surrender the gate. The leadership of Darby's Rangers at Chiunzi Pass became the glue that held the defense together. Colonel William O. Darby himself was constantly on the move, climbing from position to position, speaking directly to the men, and showing them that their commander shared the same risks. His presence gave weight to the mission, reminding soldiers that they were not anonymous figures in a forgotten mountain fight, but a critical force shaping the outcome of the Salerno invasion. When Darby appeared in a shell crater or leaned against a stone wall beside them, morale surged. Company commanders followed his example, making decisions on the spot without waiting for higher approval. Radios often failed in the mountains, and orders could not always flow smoothly. Instead, junior leaders adapted to what they saw in front of them, maneuvering squads and shifting firepower where the line was threatened. It was a decentralized fight, one that required initiative and trust. The Rangers thrived under this model, proving that small units with freedom of action could resist larger forces effectively. Non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and corporals in the foxholes, shouldered an even heavier burden. They kept squads steady during barrages, rotated men through positions, and reminded everyone of their role in the larger defense. A corporal with 6 men on a rocky ledge might not have seen the broader campaign map, but he knew that holding his stretch of ground meant the difference between a secure beachhead and collapse. That sense of responsibility, passed down through the ranks, gave the defense its backbone. The Rangers also relied on morale in its simplest forms. During lulls between attacks, men told stories, sang fragments of songs, or passed around tinned rations to lighten the moment. Even gallows humor became a weapon against fear. One ranger reportedly quipped, as artillery shells crashed nearby, that the Germans were missing the best view in Italy, pointing to the distant coastline. Such moments gave the men a sense of normalcy, a way to laugh in the face of danger, and it kept the spirit of the unit alive. Pride in the mission became a sustaining force. The order to hold the gate evolved into more than just a command. It became a point of identity. Every ranger understood that they were the last line between the enemy and the beachhead. The pass was their responsibility, their stand, and they embraced it with the stubbornness that defined their unit. That sense of ownership meant that when attacks came, men fought not only for survival but for the honor of the Rangers themselves. Discipline under such strain was not enforced by fear of punishment but by shared conviction. Men obeyed because they believed in the mission, in their leaders, and in one another. They held the line because their comrades expected it, because Darby expected it, and because history itself seemed to demand it. This internal discipline, born of mutual respect and trust, gave the defense a cohesion that artillery and machine guns alone could not provide. By the time the battle stretched into its hardest days, the Rangers' spirit had become as important as their weapons. Leadership at every level, officers walking the line, NCOs anchoring squads, and soldiers encouraging each other, ensured that Chiunzi Pass did not break. The defense was not just a matter of tactics or terrain. It was the result of men who refused to fail their mission, their comrades, or their commander. That spirit, more than anything else, kept the gate closed. The outcome of the battle for Chiunzi Pass was decisive. The Rangers held the gate, and in doing so, they saved the Salerno beachhead. After days of attacks, artillery barrages, and relentless pressure, the Germans had failed to crack the line. What they expected to seize in hours remained firmly in Allied hands. The stubborn defense denied the enemy their best chance to split the invasion force and drive the Allies back into the sea. German momentum, so fierce in the opening days, faltered in the face of this resistance. Each assault cost them men and equipment they could ill afford to lose. Tanks that wedged themselves on narrow roads became wrecks, blocking their own movements. Infantry, worn down by ambushes and artillery fire, saw their confidence erode. Kesselring's counteroffensive, meant to destabilize Avalanche, instead stalled against a ridgeline that simply refused to yield. The initiative shifted, and for the first time since the landings, the Allies felt the tide beginning to turn in their favor. For the Rangers, the cost of this success was steep. Casualty lists grew, and every unit had men missing or wounded. The evacuation of casualties down the treacherous trails was itself an ordeal, as bloodied comrades were lowered by rope or carried on makeshift stretchers under the eyes of the enemy. Supplies remained scarce, and the strain of constant bombardment showed on every face. Yet despite exhaustion and loss, the unit never broke. The sacrifice was heavy, but the victory was undeniable. The operational impact went far beyond the ridgeline. With Chiunzi secure, the Allies had time to bring in reinforcements, strengthen their beachhead, and plan the drive on Naples. The city soon fell, giving the Allied armies the port they desperately needed to sustain their advance up the peninsula. What had begun as a fragile gamble transformed into a foothold strong enough to launch the next phase of the Italian campaign. The stubborn stand at Chiunzi was one of the linchpins that made that transformation possible. Lessons learned at the pass rippled through Allied thinking. Commanders recognized the value of small unit initiative, the critical importance of terrain exploitation, and the necessity of integrating joint fires into defensive plans. The Rangers demonstrated that light infantry could achieve outsized results when properly led and positioned. These lessons were carried forward into later operations, influencing how the Allies fought in Italy and beyond. Perhaps the most important outcome was psychological. At a time when uncertainty clouded the future of the campaign, the Rangers gave the Allies confidence. They had faced German counterattacks at their fiercest and endured. They had shown that disciplined troops, even lightly armed, could hold their ground against superior numbers. That confidence spread through the force, reinforcing the belief that Avalanche could succeed, and that the path to Rome and beyond remained open. By the end of the battle, Chiunzi Pass was no longer just a geographic feature, it was a symbol of resilience. The Rangers had taken on a mission where failure meant catastrophe, and they had prevailed. The gate had been held, the invasion preserved, and the road to Naples secured. In the larger history of World War II, Chiunzi stands as a reminder that sometimes the fate of campaigns rests not in grand offensives, but in the stubborn defense of a narrow road in the mountains. The legacy of Chiunzi Pass lives on in Ranger history as a defining moment where a small band of soldiers proved that determination could outweigh numbers. Unlike earlier operations such as the raids at Dieppe or the daring landings in Sicily, Chiunzi was not about striking swiftly and withdrawing. It was about staying put, holding fast, and refusing to yield despite overwhelming odds. This was a new kind of Ranger fight, and it left an indelible mark on the identity of the force. For the men who endured it, the memory was deeply personal. Many carried scars, both physical and emotional, from those days on the ridgeline. Yet, alongside the hardship came pride. Pride in knowing that their defense had preserved the Salerno landing and enabled the Allies to drive on to Naples. Veterans spoke of the pass as a place where their training, leadership, and resolve were tested to the fullest, and where they proved themselves equal to the task. Within the broader context of World War II, the fight at Chiunzi might seem a small engagement, overshadowed by battles like Monte Cassino or Anzio, but its importance cannot be overstated. By denying the Germans their best chance to shatter Avalanche, the Rangers shaped the course of the Italian campaign. Their stand demonstrated to the world that small unit light infantry, when properly led and supported, could hold terrain that larger formations could not afford to lose. The ethos of "hold the gate" became part of Ranger tradition, echoing in later conflicts. Whether in the jungles of Vietnam, the mountains of Afghanistan, or the deserts of Iraq, Rangers continued to embody the spirit of endurance and initiative displayed at Chiunzi. The pass became not only a piece of Italian geography but a metaphor for what the Rangers represent: the determination to hold the line, no matter the odds, when the mission demands it. Today, when military historians look back at the Italian campaign, Chiunzi Pass is remembered as more than a minor action. It is remembered as proof that courage and discipline at the right place and the right time can turn the tide of battle. For Darby's Rangers, it was their legacy to have held the gate, and in holding it to have preserved the course of the Allied advance into Europe.
Thank you for joining us on the Trackpads Military History Podcast. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the battlefield, be sure to explore more articles, episodes, and series at trackpads.com.